Hello and thank you for taking the time to join in. This is part 3 of our Like and Subscribe series. If you haven't done part 1 and 2 or the bending shape layer lesson to understand the cursor, there are links in the description and the project file is there for you to download in part 1. So for part 1 and 2 we did the bell and we did the text animation for the subscribe to subscribed. Now we're going to animate everything else. And this is just, this is part 3 and there will be part 4 because in this one we're going to do things just like we're working in motion for a regular motion project. But the purpose of this series is to show you that we want to do things differently if we plan for the template to be functional and useful for the end user in Final Cut Pro. So in part 4 what we're going to do is take a few things apart, reconstruct them and do them in a way that works better in Final Cut Pro. Also, I've recorded this over the last few days, so you will probably hear the audio varies a lot. Alright, sorry about that. Okay, so let's start animating. We'll just turn off the cursor group for now. Select the bell group. Go to Properties and drop the scale down to 15%. Set the X position to 360. Now in part 1 we left the behavior animations running for the first second, so what we want to do is move this down the timeline. Go to 4 seconds and 22 frames. Select the first oscillate behavior and use the keyboard hotkeys Shift and right bracket to move the endpoint here. Then do the same with the behavior on the clapper layer. Shift right bracket. So now our bell animation runs 1 second from here. Next, select the light group. Drop the scale down to 20% and set the X position to 192. And the Y position to 10. Now select the group below and go to the anchor point tool. We want to move this group's anchor point down to the bottom left because we're going to animate it later. Okay, next we will work on the subscribe group. I'll just go back to the transform tool. Just going to close the text. Hold Shift to select the text and the button together. And then we want to group these together. Use the Shift Command G hotkeys. We'll name this group the Pop group. Go to Properties. Grab the Y scale and add a link behavior. Add the Pop group as the source and set that to the X scale. And I name that as Y to X. We do this so that we can work with just one curve in the editor. We don't need the Y and the Z. Next, go to 1 second, 29 frames. In Properties, set a keyframe on the X scale. Then move forward to 2 seconds and 4 frames. Set a keyframe here for 110%. Then go forward 5 frames and set the keyframe here back to 100%. And we will just set these to the Ease Both preset. So there's our little pop animation on the subscribe button. Alright, if we open up the text group and select the sequence behavior, we can see that in lesson 2 we left this right where it needs to be. so that as the last character animates in, now our button pops in time with that. Okay, next close the bell and the like and subscribe groups. Select the bell group and then add a new group, Shift Command N. Then shift select everything including the banner and drag them into this new group. We'll name this as Scale In. And we will do another Y to X scale link right here. Let's go to frame 25. Set a keyframe on the X scale. Move forward 30 frames and set another keyframe here. Then click back to the first one and set that to 0. Make sure the group is selected and we can finesse this curve. Set to Bezier. I break the handles to isolate it so we don't make a mess. And I'm going to set this handle here at frame 28. Okay, cool, so we have our banner animating in now. Right, we're ready to start working on the clicking finger cursor animation. The cursor is all set up and ready to go in this resource file that you're using. If you need to review how we did that, then watch the lesson we did for bending shape layers in motion. There's a link in the description for that. Okay, let's turn the group back on first and drop the scale down to 60%. Now from here, the first step is to set up 5 functional groups, and there are 3 reasons for doing this. It makes it easier to work in the keyframe editor, it lets us set anchor points independently, and we want to isolate parameters for publishing. Alright, let's open the cursor group up, select the replicator. Now use hotkeys Shift Command N to add a new group. We will name this as Scale Pub. That is the group that we will use later on to publish the scale or the size of the cursor finger. Shift select the replicator, the source, and the cursor group and drag them in. Select the Scale Pub group, add another group with Shift Command N. Drag Scale Pub into the new group, name it Rotation. Select the Scale Pub group again. Select the Anchor Point tool. Move the anchor point up to the tip of the finger. We want the anchor point up here because when we do publish the scale, it means it will size away and down and not creep up over where it should animate from. Now select the rotation group and we will move the anchor point down to the bottom here. Add another group with Shift Command N. Drag in rotation. This one we will name as Animate Out. Move the anchor point for this one. Oh, undo there. Move the anchor point for this one down to the bottom. Add another new group. Drag in the Animate Out group. Name this one Position and Scale Down. The anchor point can stay where it is, and one more group to add. Drag everything in, and this is the main group that we will call Animate in. Okay, now we have our 5 functional nested groups, and you'll see in the next steps why this is such a good way to work. Now we can start to animate this cursor. Make sure the Animate in group is selected. First of all, we want to set up more of those links between the Y scale and X scale. So we will do one first on the Animate in group. Now to work faster, I'm just going to option drag a copy of this to the next one. We'll drag a copy to the position and scale down group. Just drag in this group now to replace the source. Drag another copy to the Animate Out group. Replace the source. One more copy to the Scale Pub group and replace the source. Come back to the Animate In group. We're going to move the anchor point down to around the bottom left corner down here. Bring the playhead back to the first frame. Go to the rotation and set a keyframe. Set that to -90. Now come to frame 25. Set another keyframe at 0. And I'll finesse the curve here. Now come back to the first frame. Set an X scale keyframe at 0. Come back to frame 25 and set that back to 100. And finesse the curve the same way. So this is our animation in for the cursor. Make sure your playhead is at frame 25. Select the position and scale down group. Go to properties and open up the position parameters. Set a keyframe here on the X and the Y position and also on the X scale. Come forward to frame 1.25, 1 second 25 frame. Set another keyframe on the X and Y and the scale. Drop the scale down to 60. Then for the X and Y, just move the parameters to get the fingertip around about here. Now you can finesse these curves any way you like. For now, to make things easy and work faster, we will just use the ease in and out preset. So now the cursor will fall back down into the right position for the click. And you can see the button is popping right at the right place. Make sure the playhead is at frame 25. Now come to the rotation group. We want to just set the rotation in our rotation group. Just pivot it back this way, about -14, set a keyframe, and come forward 1 second, frame 125, and turn the rotation back 12 or 13. And we'll just set that to the ease in, ease out preset. Okay, that is looking alright. Now we're on 1 second, frame 25. Come to the position and scale down group. Come forward to frame 2 seconds 24. Set another keyframe for X and Y. For these frames, from 125 to 224, the cursor will just hold position. Come forward to frame 3 seconds 24. Now we're just going to adjust the X position parameter over, get it around about this location because we're going to rotate the cursor again. Come back to frame 2.24. Come to rotation, set a keyframe. Come to frame 3.24 and add some rotation to get the finger into place. And we'll just use the ease both preset. Come to the position scale down group again. We're going to set some more holding frames soon, but this is how it's looking. Okay, come back to 3.24. Move to frame 4.4, set another keyframe on the X and Y. And set a keyframe on rotation. These are holding frames again. Come to frame 4.19. Come to position and scale down group. Now adjust the X parameter to move the finger over the bell. Around about here because we're going to rotate back. Come to rotation, turn the rotation around to get the finger into place. And use the ease both preset. Come back to position scale down group. So here is our cursor animation traversing from the subscribe button to the like to the bell. Make sure your playhead is at 4.19. Select the position and scale down group. Move to frame 4.23. Set keyframes on the X and Y. Come forward to frame 5.08. Come to the Animate out group. Set a keyframe on the X scale. Come back to 4.23. Set another keyframe. Back to 5.08 and set that down to 0. And I'll finesse this curve. Okay, here's our animation in for now. And next we want to do a quick and easy animate out and add a couple of template markers. Go to frame 9.15. In the banner group, go to the scale in group. Set a keyframe on the X scale. And go to frame about 9.28, just one frame before the end of the project. set a keyframe here and set the X scale to 0. I'm going to adjust this curve to give us a nice quick animation out. Come to one frame before we build out, so 9.14. I'm just going to right click, add a marker, right click again to edit the marker, choose, you'll see we have build in mandatory, build in optional, out mandatory and optional. We'll choose build out optional. Now we want to come to the frame just where the bell stops animating. Okay, right about here. Repeat that process, add marker, edit marker, choose build in optional. Come to the project to the published parameters. The difference between mandatory and optional is that optional will populate the published parameters with 2 checkboxes. These are not functional in Motion, but in Final Cut Pro, they let the end user turn the animation in and out, on and off. Alright, now we can animate the clicking action of our cursor. Go to frame 1.26 and select the replicator. I see that I left an active keyframe in the twists in the resource file, but we can just ignore that. Set a keyframe on the radius and the twists. Go forward to frame 1.29. Set another keyframe on each. Set the radius to 250 and the twist to 0.02. Go to frame 2.05. Set the radius back to 288 and the twists back to 0. And set the curve to ease both. Alright, here's our first little click. For the next click on the like, go to frame 3.24. Set a keyframe just on the radius. Move to 3.29. Set the radius to 250. Go to 4.01 and set it back to 288. Set that to ease both. Now for the bell click, go to 4.19. Set keyframes for the radius and the twist. Go to 4.22. Set keyframes here. Radius to 250, twist to 0.02. Then go to 4.25. Set the radius back to 288 and the twists back to 0 again. And set to ease both. So now we have our cursor clicks done. Right, now we need to animate a click reaction for the light. Go to frame 3.29 and from the like group, grab the cuff layer. In the inspector, turn on the outline and set the brush to 0 opacity. Set keyframes on the fill opacity and the brush opacity. Go to the next frame, set keyframes again, and just swap the opacities around. Then repeat those steps with the hand layer. So now the like layer swaps from the fill to the outline on the click. Okay, let's give the like some bounce too. Go to the frame at 4 seconds, select the like group, the one with the anchor point that we set earlier. Go to Properties and set a keyframe on the Z rotation. Move to 4.04, set a keyframe for 10, move on to 4.09 and set rotation back to 0. And ease both. Nothing amazing here, just a little bounce. Now to finish up the bell, go to frame 4.23. Now for the bell and clapper layers, just repeat the same steps we used for the light to swap the fill to the brush outline on the click. Actually, move the first keyframes to the start at 4.22, with the next frame being 4.23. Alright, we are almost done with the build-in. We just need to wrap up the subscribe button animation from here. Go to frame 1.29. That's the frame just before the letter D animates. We want to move the text to sit in more to the center, but first we need to drop the button layer scale for a better fit. Select the button layer, set the scale to 90 and set a keyframe here. Now select the text group and just move the X position to place it in the middle better. And set a keyframe. Now go to the next frame, 2 seconds. Select the button layer and set the scale back to 100. Then set the text group back to an X position value that places it to the center. Okay, go to frame 1.29. Now we need to change the button color on the click. Select the button layer and in the shape inspector, set a keyframe on the color. Now go to 2 seconds and set a keyframe. In your color panel, go to RGB sliders, and use the hex code FF2600. So now the button changes color, but note, this is one of those things that we will have to revise to make this template functional in Final Cut Pro. Okay, make sure you're back to frame 1.29 and select the text. We need that to swap colors too. Go to the appearance settings and set a keyframe on the color. Use color code 6B, 6B, 6B. Now go to 2 seconds and set a keyframe just to set the color back to white. So now the text will also change color on the click, but again, this is one of those things that we have to revise and do it a better way to make it functional in Final Cut Pro. Okay, so we are done with our build-in animation. And like I noted in the beginning, we have worked in a way that suits just a motion project. We're going to have a quick chat about why the methods we used are not ideal if you want your template to be useful in Final Cut Pro. But before we do that, I need to fix a mistake that I made earlier. So let's do that first. Alright, before we can wrap it up, I need to fix the mistake I led you into earlier on. When the cursor clicks the like and the bell, it should swap from outline to fill rather than from fill to outline. So I am at frame 3.29 where the cursor clicks the like. In the style here, I'm just going to rearrange these keyframes. So for each layer, just swap the opacity sliders around. Then come forward 1 frame and do the same for each layer. Okay, now I will do the same for the bell. Just grab the layer, click to get to the next frame and swap the opacity sliders around. Go forward and swap them around again. Okay, now we're ready to move on. Alright, so we're done for now. We have finished the first phase of animating this graphic end to end. However, as I said in the beginning, we were going to do it kind of the wrong way to begin with. So the way we have worked is great for animating in Motion 5. But in the process we use, we didn't really give any consideration at all about how to build this in a way that will be functional and practical to use in Final Cut Pro. We have done a couple of things already that support Final Cut Pro. So the way we animated the text in part 2, bank that, and remember, next time you want to animate typography that way, do it all from a single text layer with sequence text. You're setting yourself up well for versatility in Final Cut Pro. For the bell, we used behaviors there. So again, we're setting that up for versatility in Final Cut Pro. Behaviors are riggable and publishable. But what we've done really poorly here is the way we animated the color changes. We've keyframed, and I picked on this topic because I see in a lot of the learning resources out there, this is done. Keyframe the colors, just working in motion, and then you get to Final Cut Pro and bang, you've got a problem because Final Cut Pro is just going to ignore those animations. So in the next part, part 4, we're going to look at a couple of ways that you can animate color states and be able to publish the color controls for the user too, without it breaking and failing in Final Cut Pro. But the big one, the big mistake, is all about animating our cursor. So we've used keyframes, and that is not necessarily going to be a problem because, as we're going to see, you can rig keyframe states. I'm going to show you how. Alright, but when we have a graphic like this, so if you make templates for yourself, if you're a part of a small production team, or you are that production team yourself and you make your own templates, if you're doing templates for a client, if you want to get into freelancing, if you're part of a plugin team, wherever it is in the scope of a project, it's likely that the length, the dimensions of width and length for this will be down as something that have to be publishable. And that is where we're going to run into trouble. So generally, I mean, you can just imagine now, if we increase the length here, let's go and have a look at the base. So if we do increase the length dimensions, okay, the layout gets thrown out. That's easy enough to solve. We can have it so these elements keep to the layout, but then our cursor hand is always going to end up out of place. So what we're going to look at is a way for this cursor. Now, if you need a reminder of where we're heading, go back and have a look at the project preview, because I spelt it out there. But we are going to look at an alternative to keyframes that will allow a graphic like this, and I'm using like and subscribe here kind of to prove a point, because there are plenty of animation projects where something is traversing along an axis. An axis has to be publishable, and then we want that element to be able to update with those changes, and that's what I'm going to share with you in part 2. Alright, it's been a really long tutorial, a really long lesson. Thank you very much for sticking to the end, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.